You know, I've said on this channel quite a few times, I'm a huge fan of the Steam controller, and it's true. The reasons I'm a fan of the Steam controller are because of A, Steam input is just wonderful and incredibly customizable, so you can make your games work the way that you want them to work. Two, did I say A before and now I'm on to two? Whatever, let me know. Two, we have these fantastic trackpads that are on the Steam controller. They offer so much flexibility that you would not have with traditional joysticks. And then the third reason that I'm a huge fan of the Steam controller is the gyroscope. It allows you to make the thing feel like a really good aiming device for shooters and games like that. And all of that is still true. And, you know, you go back a month and you ask me, you say, Bill, what do you want in a Steam controller 2? And I do want a Steam controller 2. And I would have said, well, give me all the stuff that's on a Steam Deck, get rid of the screen, make it ergonomic, and that's all I would need. And I would have been wrong, because I just got my hands on a new controller, and that new controller, well, it has something that no other controller that I have used has. Well, it has more of something than all of the other controllers. And we'll talk about that in a second. But once I got my hands on this controller and I tested it out, I don't just want a Steam controller 2. I also want Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo and anybody else that makes controllers to sit up and say, okay, we've been doing it wrong. These guys figured it out. Let's do it like they did. And you might say, well, Bill, why don't you just buy the other controller that you're talking about? You can't. It's not for sale. So, what controller am I talking about? And what did they put in this controller that just kind of blew me away? Well, that's right here. This is the controller I'm talking about. It is the Input Labs Alpaca. And I'm going to put this here on the camera so you can take a look at it. Boy, oh boy, is this thing weird. It's got these face buttons up on the top. It's got 4 like select and start buttons. We've got a D-pad over here. We've got a joystick. There's a function button right there. Then you have a scroll wheel for some reason. A really weird 8-way input hat switch. 4 face buttons. 2 bumpers. 2 triggers. And 2 back paddles. For a grand total of 28 inputs on this thing. Now, is that enough to replace a mouse and keyboard? Most of the time, yes. All of the time, no. Because you're always going to have some games that need a little bit more finessing and you can't quite get it right. And that's why this controller, as weird and awesome as it is not the final answer, in my opinion. It's absolutely a step in the right direction. Like, this is a really good answer, but it's not quite there yet. And I want to talk about why it's a really good answer and why it's not quite there yet in this video. But first, let's talk about those features that it has. I want to start with the things about this that I love. And there's 2 things on this that I love that you can't see that I have not mentioned yet. And that is a gyroscope. There's a gyroscope in this side of the controller right here. And there's a gyroscope in this side of the controller right there. You might be thinking, why would you want to have 2 gyroscopes? Don't they just duplicate each other's functions? Isn't that a waste of electronics? And that is exactly the same thing that I thought when they reached out to me and asked me to take a look at their controller. I thought, what is the point of having that extra gyroscope? Well, let me answer your question. The reason that you want to have that extra gyroscope is because it allows for, they can both record those same movements, and they both record them slightly differently, and then they can get rid of any noise. This thing, super stable. I've never used a gyroscope that felt as good as this. Secondly, you can have, and I could be wrong about how this works, but I am not wrong about how it feels. You can have one tuned for really big, quick movements. And then you can have the other fine-tuned for very fine and precise movements. This allows you to turn around in your game very quickly with very small movements. But quick movement, I turn around. I've got the controller, I do a quick turn like this. I spin around, and then when I want to aim precisely, I just don't move as much. I move very, very little, and I can easily aim at whatever it is that I'm trying to aim at. In fact, I kind of suck at video games. I like to talk about video games a lot. I really enjoy playing games, but I've never been somebody who's been really good at video games. I just don't have the patience to practice for long enough to get good. But I was playing Titanfall 2 on my PC with this controller, and I was just clipping off headshots left and right. It was amazing. It was really amazing. I felt like a badass. I felt like a badass playing this game, and I never feel like a badass playing games because I'm always getting killed over and over, which doesn't bother me. But damn, this thing is cool. So those gyroscopes are fantastic. Now, you may have used gyroscopes in the past, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, how do they deal with the fact that sometimes you just run out of room? Like if I'm turning to the right, my right, probably your left. If I'm turning to the right, there's only so far I can go before my wrists kind of are like, I can't really turn them anymore. So how do you deal with that? Well, before we get to that, let's talk about a mouse. You're sitting there using a mouse on your desk, right? You move your mouse to the right or to the left. You've moved it as far as you can. You can't go any further, so what do? You pick up your hand, you move your hand back over, you set it back down, and you drag it again. We do this all the time without even thinking about it. So what is their answer? Well, it's very similar to an answer that Valve came up with. On the Steam Deck, you have a capacitive thumbstick, which registers when you are touching the thumbstick. And the face buttons right here, those face buttons, in between them is a capacitive pad right there. That, whoops, I dropped it. That pad right there is capacitive. That means it knows when you're okay, good. That's it. I thought I broke it for a second. That means it knows when you're touching it. So what do? If I need to make a quick movement to the right, I've got my thumb resting there in the middle. I twist my hand, and then I pick up my thumb, and I kind of reset. And then if I got to look to the left, I twist my hand, pick it up, and reset. We do this all the time with a mouse. This is not any more cumbersome than using a mouse. And I was skeptical before I tried it, but I'm telling you, it works really well. All right, so you've got that. What about the precision? Like, I've always felt like it was super precise using gyroscope, but a mouse was better, right? I don't know anymore. Like, I feel like this was just as good, if not better, than using a mouse. And that you're talking to somebody who really is a fan of gyroscope controls. So if you are not a fan of gyroscope controls, maybe you will find it awful. Maybe you won't be able to hit anything. But like I said before, I was taking dudes out in Titanfall 2 super easily because of the precision that I could get with very, very tiny movements. Okay, so that's what I like about this controller. Let's talk about what I hate about this controller, because there's a lot about this controller that I don't like. No. I almost forgot. There's another thing that I really like about this controller, and this is going to be controversial, maybe. These triggers, they're digital triggers. They are not analog triggers. And when I first saw that, I was like, well, why in the heck wouldn't you do analog triggers? Analog triggers are better because they give you one more style of input. Like if I'm playing a racing game, I want to be able to just hit that trigger slowly or let off a little bit as I go around a corner instead of hitting the brakes. Totally makes sense. Here's what they were thinking. They wanted it to be like a mouse click. When you're playing a shooter and you're shooting using a mouse, there is zero travel to clicking the button. You click the mouse button, you shoot. It's either on or it's off, and there's no degrees to on or off. With a typical controller, if I can just grab this one, with a typical controller, there's travel when you are pulling that trigger. So if you are playing a game and you have to shoot, the amount of time from when you start pulling the trigger until you actually hit the bottom and then the shot fires, that might be too much. And in that time, you might get killed. The person might have moved, and maybe something else has happened, and now you've lost. So they decided, here's what we'll do instead. We will just make it so that those are just digital inputs, which means it is a hair trigger, and you can shoot really fast. It's fantastic. All right, let's talk about the things I don't like. I want to start with the back paddles. I don't like where they are. They don't feel quite right to me. I really like the back paddles on the Steam Deck. And do I have any other controllers with back paddles? Oh, I have the Steam controller, which also has back paddles. Of all of the ones that I've used, I like the Steam Deck's back paddles the best. These ones, they're okay. I'm not a fan. Secondly, the thumbstick. Not a fan of the thumbstick either. I think that this thumbstick is really weak. It gets the job done, but overall, I am not a fan of that thumbstick. The this little hat switch right here, I can show it to you. All right, this is an 8-way hat switch. So one up, down, left, right, and then up, left, up, right. You know, that kind of thing. Hitting the diagonals feels weird, and I can understand what they were going for. You know, you effectively, by going an 8-way switch instead of a 4-way switch, you are doubling the inputs that you can get in that little tiny space. I don't like the way it feels. It feels kind of hard to get those diagonals exactly the way that I want, but that might just be a practice kind of thing. The capacitance. I really like that they have that capacitance because it allows you to, reset your gyro. But I really wish that the buttons were capacitive too, because I have a tendency, and I don't know if this is just me or if everybody does this, but I have a tendency to just leave my thumb on what would be the X button on an Xbox controller. I tend to just leave it right there, and then if I gotta hit the B button, I quickly move my thumb over. With this, you are expected to keep your thumb in the middle, which, to be fair, is closer to all of the other buttons, but I don't like that. So I would really like it if all of these were also capacitive, so I could just leave my thumb on any button and have this part underneath also be capacitive. I think that would be an added bonus. Is that going to drive up the cost? I don't know. Also, when I go to press these buttons right here, these face buttons that are kind of in the middle, I feel like every time I reach over to them, I don't know which one is which just by feel. And so quite often I will hit the wrong one. I wish that these were different shapes. Now, speaking of shape, you're probably noticing by looking at this thing, it's all weird and angular looking. That, I assumed, was like a limitation of 3D printing, because this is a 3D printed controller. It is not. That is a design decision that they actually made. Like, they decided they wanted to have this weird angled stuff. It doesn't feel sharp in the hands. Like, it doesn't feel bad, but I would have liked it to be smoother, like, say, my Stadia controllers or my Xbox controller or the DualSense controller. I think all of those feel better in the hand than this. And I don't like the 3D printed feel of this controller. It feels off to me. And then the last thing about it that I don't like, well, two more things. Another thing that I don't like is the scroll wheel. I think the scroll wheel is great, but let's say that I have a weapon, you use it for your weapon wheel. Let's say that I have a pistol and then a shotgun and then a sniper rifle, and I want to go from my pistol to the shotgun. A lot of times I overshoot. This might just be a practice thing, but a lot of times I overshoot and I end up on the sniper rifle instead. So I just wish that those were a little harder of clicks, because there is a click when you are rolling the scroll wheel with your thumb. There is a click that happens. I wish that they were a little harsher or a little more resistive so that it was harder for me to roll through them. Maybe if they did that, I would say, well, this is way too hard. I wish it was smoother. There's no way you're going to please everybody. All right. And then the last thing about it that I hate, and this thing I actually hate, it's wired. It's wired and it's USB micro. It's the only thing I despise more than a wired device is a wired device with USB micro. It's the worst connector. All my other controllers are wire free. This one has to be plugged in. Of course, it's like a prototype. Like, look at this thing. It is a prototype. This is not something, you cannot buy this controller right now. You can print it yourself. I would never make one of these because I don't have the ability, but if you have the ability, then maybe you could make one of these and you could smooth all this out and fix the things about it that I don't like. But overall, this controller has convinced me that no matter what any other controller has in it, whether it's two joysticks or track pads or, dual stage triggers or a scroll wheel or that weird 8-way hat right there, no matter what a controller has, from here on out, every controller, in my opinion, needs to have two gyros. Not one, two, because the amount of precision that you can have when using that is absolutely insanity. And those of you who haven't tried it, you can't imagine how good it is. It's that much better. It's like the difference between aiming a rifle with the old-fashioned, sights like this, where you got to line them up, and having a laser dot. Like, that's the difference. It feels so good. And it's not just for shooters. I've been playing New World with this. Now, when you hook this thing up, it doesn't register as a controller by default. It is a mouse and keyboard. For instance, this right here, south on the face buttons, south is F on a keyboard. This is a keyboard. The gyroscope is the mouse, and this is the keyboard. We got W, A, S, D right here. We got F, we got Q, we got E, we got left click, we got right click. What else do we have here? I think that this is the escape button right here. This is the tab button. I think that's M. I'm still learning them. The thing is that's kind of driving me crazy, that I hate, is that when you're playing a game, it's going to say, press N to do something, and then you have to go through the mental gymnastics to figure out which one of these buttons is supposed to be the N button again, and nothing is labeled. And the reason nothing is labeled is because you can switch into different modes, and that changes up the button presses. Does that make sense? So different things do different things. Like right now, this is set to WASD. I can press this button and up on the controller in order to put it up into fusion mode. And then this is then a joystick input instead of WASD. So that's why they didn't label anything, because it changes what it is. But it works on the Steam Deck. It works on Windows. This thing is amazing. You can't buy them. and I wouldn't recommend it for most people because all the other problems that I don't like about it. But they are onto something really cool over at Input Labs, and I highly recommend that you check out their website. And then, Valve, can you just buy them? Can you just buy them and take all the research that they came up with and put it in a Steam controller version 2. Am I under the mic still? Put it into a Steam controller version 2 and sell it to us. I want this from Valve.